Well, hello there. Phil here from the Blue Envelope channel. So in this video, I thought I would take a little look back at the Kingdom Halls I've attended over the years and sort of see what happened to them. There's a lot of sales of halls and whatnot. And so, yeah, I thought it'd just be kind of interesting to take a little walk down memory lane and see where the halls I went to, what's up with them these days. So starting at the very beginning, when my parents converted to witnesses in 1983, that was in Rochester, New York. And so the first hall I attended was in Rondequoit, a suburb of Rochester. And that is this hall here, 2913 Culver Road. Now this hall was built in 1969. So it's kind of interesting to place it in that whole pre-1975 build-up era when things were really hopping for witnesses in the United States or around the world, I guess. And that's one thing I noticed. We'll see a little theme that a lot of the halls I went to were built in that kind of boom time of the late 60s, early 70s kind of thing. Now this hall ended up being sold in 2006 for $290,000. And it ended up being bought by a dentist's office. And so that's what it is today. And so it's kind of interesting to see the pictures of the hall that I knew as a dentist's office. So it's kind of fun. Definitely been remodeled a lot on the inside. Got an aquarium and a nice floor. There was like a flagstone floor in the lobby when I attended. So that's what ended up with that hall. Now, when I was maybe 12 or so, we moved out to, we were very zealous, and we moved out where the need was greater, say maybe 45 minutes east of Rochester, out into the country, and we started attending this Kingdom Hall. This is the Newark congregation, located in Newark, New York, maybe halfway between Rochester and Syracuse. This is a really pretty hall, kind of set out in the country, a lot of green space around it. I always like this hall, although I will say the one thing, it had a really bad electrical connection for whatever reason to the grid, and so it didn't take much, and the power was constantly going out during the Sunday meetings, and we would just kind of carry on, and it might come on again, it might not. So that I always got a kick out of that when that happened as a kid. You can see there's a big green field across the street, and there's a big campus there, which I think originally was a Kodak or Xerox corporate campus. But in that field, there's a big hill there, and that was our official sledding hill. So we would always go sledding there each winter. I couldn't find the date that this hall was built, but I would say it's definitely one of the newer ones. It's not that 60s era, but maybe more the 80s, 90s era. Kind of a two-level situation there with a lower parking lot and then the Kingdom Hall on the upper level. I can remember one circuit overseer back when they used to have campers, trailers, and he would hook up his camper in the upper parking lot and then do his CO visit for the week there. One of the coolest things for me as a kid was that right across the street was a family of witnesses that lived there, and they had a son, Nathan Hopkirk, and he was maybe just a couple years younger than I was, and so we got to be pretty good friends after I moved there. And so lots of times, we'd sleep over at their house Saturday night, and then Sunday morning, all we'd have to do is just walk across the street, and boom, we were at the meeting there. So this hall is still being currently used by the Newark congregation, and it has never been sold off. Now, what's interesting, though, is what happened to one of the neighboring congregations, Palmyra, to the west. And there's some really interesting posts by Mr. Quick, one of the users on the Jehovah'sWitness.com website, which is its own interesting site. But at any rate, it has a lot of good historical information on there. And so Mr. Quick, otherwise known as Ted Ginther, and he writes that he attended the Palmyra, New York congregation, and you probably remember Palmyra as where Mormonism was founded. Joseph Smith lived there, and that's where the congregation got where the religion got its start. But Palmyra also has a long history with the Bible students and Jehovah's Witnesses. And anyway, so Mr. Quick writes that he was an elder in Palmyra. He mentions that his brother Mark was the presiding overseer in the Newark, New York congregation, and that is completely true. Mark Ginther was the PO when I was there, and he had two daughters, and Wendy and Sarah, and there was a lot of kids in the Newark congregation at that time, which was cool. And so they were in the crew that we always hung around with together. He has an interesting little comment that there was a letter that hung in the foyer of the Palmyra Kingdom Hall, and it was an old letter. It recommended that an interested person contact Ted Ginther's father-in-law, who was named Levi Peterson, born 1889. Interestingly, the letter was signed by Joseph Rutherford. So that was a little historical artifact that they had in the hall there. But anyways, about 5 years ago, he wrote an interesting post about what happened to Palmyra, that they had one of the older halls and they were looking to rebuild. And so kind of the standard practice of the congregation started, saving up a fund for a new hall. They sold their old hall. They moved in temporarily with one of the neighboring congregations, which happened to be Newark. And then, as it happened, the society ultimately decided to just dissolve the Palmyra congregation. That money that was, kind of put away for the new hall was donated to or sent off to headquarters, and the congregation was just kind of dissolved into the neighboring halls, Newark and the other surrounding congregations. So Newark made the cut, but Palmyra was dissolved. And that's one thing I'll say about Irondequoit as well. When the hall was sold off in 2006, I'm pretty sure that the congregation was also dissolved at that time. I'm not 100% sure. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but there's this where things just go down the memory hole in Jehovah's Witnesses. And as I moved from hall to hall, it seemed like we always kept in touch with maybe one family from each congregation, but otherwise it was just gone. We never heard what was going on in that congregation or things that were going on. Maybe you'd see, if it was the same district, you'd see the friends at the district convention each summer. And that was about it. That congregation was gone and forgotten. And the new congregation you were in was your new instant family that you were immersed in. So some of the details, it's a little fuzzy on the past of these different halls. So around 1995, my family moved to Jamestown, New York, which is the very western part of New York State. And we would be there, say, 15 years, maybe 95 to 2010-ish kind of thing. And it's hard to talk about Jamestown as having, individual halls that we were in. It's almost like one mega congregation that just happens to be split into different groups. As I talked about in my Western New York videos, that Jamestown has a super dense population of witnesses historically. It's a very religious area, and they always tended to have kind of twice the ratio of witnesses to population in Jamestown as the rest of the United States, which itself has a pretty high ratio of witnesses. So, and how it was split up, there were 3 congregations when we moved there around 95, and basically you could sort of, if you're looking at a map, it was like a pie, with the center of the pie being right in the city center of Jamestown, and then the 3 congregations kind of radiated out in thirds from that center out, in their territories would extend out into the country. And so that's how it was split up. And so as you can imagine, in the city itself, as you got right close to the center of those 3 territories where they all met up, it wouldn't take, you could only, you could go a mile and you'd be in a different congregation's territory. And so there's always this constant flux and flow of people. As they moved, they would end up in a different congregation's territory. And so people were always moving in and out, and getting married and going to a different hall. And so everybody, so like I say, it was almost like one mega group of witnesses there that just happened to be split up into different halls. So when we moved there was three congregations and three kingdom halls. They each had their own, and there was also a Spanish group that kind of met. They just had their own Sunday meeting typically at that point. So this was the oldest hall in Jamestown. This was built in 1964, and this was they were very imaginative names. There was the North, East, and West congregation. And so this is the East congregation's Kingdom Hall when we moved there. And originally they were the units, Northeast and West units back in the day, but they were congregations by the time we got there. So this was the first hall to be built in town in 1964, and it was kind of interesting in that it had a dry pool in the basement for baptism. So this was, I think, kind of in the era when they were still meeting in high school auditoriums and things periodically for assemblies. And so anyways, the baptismal candidates could go over to the hall there and get baptized if need be. This is the second Kingdom Hall that was built in Jamestown. This was in 1969, so we're in that pre-75 build-up boom time again. And so this was the West Congregation's hall when we moved there. And then just a year later, in 1970, a third congregation was formed in Jamestown, and Kingdom Hall was built. And so this was the North Congregation. And so this is the congregation that we started going to when we moved to Jamestown. I don't know if we use the term troubleshooters when we moved to Jamestown. I don't know if this is a common thing, but when I used to ride the school bus to school, if there were real rowdy school buses, there would be a person called the troubleshooter that would ride the bus as well, and it was an adult that was there to kind of keep all the kids in line and from getting totally out of control. It'd help out the bus driver. And so when we moved to Jamestown, my family, we were sort of like the troubleshooters being brought in to help out the city. And the thing was, when we moved there in the mid-90s, there was this big thing there were lots of these elders who had families, and their kids were really bad in witness terms. And they were very weak spiritually and constantly getting into trouble, and so it was really irritating to the circuit overseers that were coming through there that these elders weren't presiding over their households in a fine manner. And ideally, I think they would have liked to delete all those elders with these wayward kids. And but there was a lot of these elders for whatever reason that had been appointed, but then they might have been fine giving talks, but definitely were not raising good witness families. And so my family came into town when my dad got a job down there, and we were like, I don't know, I guess like a breath of fresh air to the circuit overseer, because we were, solid witnesses, towing the line, and we were never going to give him any trouble. And my dad was an elder, and so he could come in and kind of pick up a lot of the slack, kind of whip the congregations into shape, and that's what happened. A lot of those elders ended up getting deleted, and of course now I have a much different perspective on those kids, and trying not to get sucked too far into the religion. But at the time, I was like, man, these kids got to get their act together. They're slacking off. So, anyways, that's kind of the deal when we moved to Jamestown. And I will say that after we moved there in the mid-90s, that things really started picking up in Jamestown, and really, really a lot of activity in the congregations. And anyways, the upshot was that we formed a new congregation maybe around 2000-ish, and that was given the exciting name of the South Congregation. And so now we had four English congregations in town there, and so my family was assigned to the South, the new congregation, and that was really exciting. I'd never been in a brand new congregation like that, and there was a lot of positivity and a lot of energy in the congregation there. So that was kind of a fun time for me. And so as things were really doing very well in Jamestown. The society kind of gave the okay for money to be put into Jamestown and specifically in the kingdom halls that were in the area. And so initially, the first hall to be sold off was the West Congregation's Kingdom Hall there. And so that was sold around 2001, and they were working on building a new Kingdom Hall, and that ended up being built around 2003. So now I will say the real estate situation in Jamestown is horrible. If you ever want to move somewhere that has cheap real estate, go to Jamestown, New York. Everything, housing and everything is really cheap there. And so it's good if you're a buyer, but if you're a seller, it's Kingdom Halls aren't always the easiest thing to sell anyway, especially these 60s era ones that were kind of pretty, other than being another church, it's kind of hard to sell them sometimes. And anyways, I don't know how much money the society actually made on these sales, as we'll see, but anyways, the West Congregation was the first one to be sold off, and it was bought by a church. And looking into it now, it looks like it's kind of a youth center for one of the area churches. So it's kind of interesting to see a Kingdom Hall, an old Kingdom Hall, and what it looks like nowadays, owned by a church with a cross and inside, and you can see the old Kingdom Hall chairs still survive. They must have gone with the purchase price. And this hall was sold for $132,500 in 2001. So by 2003, the West had a new Kingdom Hall built, a really pretty building, almost fully bricked in. So a lot of labor went into it. I can remember being local help on the quick build, and it's a lot of fun. I always liked working on the quick builds. And I can remember doing security there on the site overnights during the construction, and drinking tons of Dr. Pepper to stay awake. And so anyways, that was a really pretty hall, really scenic area a piece of property that they got for it. And so that was the new hall that the West got there. You can see the name on the pick there, which is pretty good pick. Brandon Schuster, he was a guy around my age, and a witness in town, and he kind of did little photography work, and so he took some nice pictures of the hall there a few years back. Well, kind of around that same time, the North Congregation put up its hall for sale, and now this was a very difficult place to sell because it's basically a commercial property, but the spot the street it was on, was this very secluded cul-de-sac. So for a while, I was the one who would call the speakers each week to make sure they were on for coming in to give a talk on the Sunday. And the pre-Google Maps, I always had to give very detailed directions about the streets, how to find the Kingdom Hall, because it was super hard to find if you weren't very familiar with the area. So obviously a pretty terrible spot for a commercial business to buy, or even for a church for that matter. And so that hall was for sale for quite a while. And I don't have the exact date that it was sold or the price that it was sold for, but eventually, after a couple of years, it did finally sell. And the North Congregation, I'm a little fuzzy. The North Congregation was dissolved somewhere along the line, kind of in that mid-2000s, but I can't remember if it lived on for a few years and they met in one of the neighboring halls for a few years, but that's kind of the scoop there. So again, we just see some pics of the hall from the inside. Again, the chairs went with the sale evidently, and you can see the literature counter in the back there. Spent many hours of my life behind that counter doing literature inventory and whatnot. So there was some period, at least a few years, that the building eventually was bought by this Arcade Senior Services doing Medicare solutions. Although I will say there's a for sale sign in the Google Maps picture, so it looks like it may be up for sale once more. So I wish them well with that sale. It's probably going to take them a while. As I mentioned in the video about the podium maker, there was a Spanish class held in Jamestown around 2005, and with the boost from the students that graduated from that class, the Spanish group was upgraded to a Spanish congregation around that time, '05, '06. And so that was another congregation that joined, and I was in that hall. And so we ended up moving, now that we needed 2 meetings a week, we ended up moving into the new West congregation that had been built, the West Kingdom Hall. And so that was nice because that was a very new hall that we got to share with the West. And then at that point, so the North, I think, had been dissolved at that point, and the South and East congregations were meeting in the East Kingdom Hall. And they were doing quite well, and so they got the go-ahead to build a new Kingdom Hall for them as well. And so their Kingdom Hall was put up for sale, and as we saw, it was eventually bought by Libera, which is sort of a computer solutions business. Again, kind of a tricky hall to sell. It was a commercial property, but way out in the country. So that took a little while to happen. I'm not sure what the selling price was there, but actually, it just in 2020, the hall was put up for auction by the current owners. So that kind of gives you an idea that they had to auction it off, of how hard the real estate market is in the area there. But again, it's kind of interesting to see the hall from the inside after it's no longer a Kingdom Hall. I'm not sure what happened with the sale as far as how much it actually went for at auction last spring there. But at any rate, in the next year or so, I would say around maybe 2006, the new Kingdom Hall was built for the South and East congregations. And so again, a very nice hall, mostly brick there. I can remember helping out with when the bricklayers came down to lay all the brick on the outside. And I can just remember how it's like, man, these guys are so cranky. They were always yelling at us that we weren't bringing the mortar quick enough, or we were doing it wrong. And oh, they're so grumpy. And now I kind of see that, the guy they'd worked all week laying brick in their jobs in Rochester, and then they had come down for being part of the regional building committee, and come down on their day off, and again doing the same thing, working all day laying brick, but now for free. And so, yeah, I kind of get why they were a little cranky, but and again, turned out to be a very nice looking hall. Yeah, my sister was married there in this Kingdom Hall, and a very nice location. So during the time I lived in Jamestown, things were really kind of boom time there for the witnesses, and there were 3 congregations when we got there. We went up to 4. Then we lost one. The North went down to 3. And interestingly, just last year in 2019, the South congregation was dissolved there as well. So that new congregation that had been formed in around 2000 was officially disbanded. And so that brought them back down to two congregations. So actually one less than when we had moved there. And I will say the Spanish, as far as I know, is still a congregation there. So 2 English and 1 Spanish in town. So it's interesting to see how the situation there in Jamestown kind of reflects the ebb and flow of witnesses in general, how there was boom times in the 60s, 70s, then things kind of slumped down. Then kind of that 90s, early 2000s, things boomed up again, and now things are contracting again in town there. And interestingly, actually, when I was looking, just last month, that West Kingdom Hall went on the market and is for sale now. So the one that was built around 2003 is for sale. They have it listed for $249,000. I mean, I'd be very surprised if they get that amount of money for it, but it is a very nice property, so we'll see what happens with that. So interestingly, once that sells, Jamestown will be down to only a single Kingdom Hall. And so you'll have two English and one Spanish congregations sharing that hall, which I've heard is kind of the number that the society is shooting for these days, to have three congregations to a hall. And so that's what it'll be like there. So actually the fewest halls in Jamestown in, say, 60 years. So that's kind of interesting. So yeah, just a little walk down memory lane, seeing what's happened to the halls and congregations I've been to over the years. And yeah, you have to share in the comments what's up with your local situation with halls and congregations and how things are going these days. But anyways, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you like. And anyways, take care.